The parking garage smelled like rain and cold concrete, and she was holding 4 grocery bags she had absolutely no intention of admitting were too heavy. I took them out of her hands the way I'd done 100 times before. And she said, very quietly, "I always wait for you to offer. Not thank you. Not you didn't have to. That one. I always wait." Which meant there had been waiting, which meant there had been a pattern I'd been living inside of for 2 years without ever once seeing the shape of it. My name is Daniel Reyes. I'm 34. I manage the loading and inventory floor for a mid-size furniture distributor, which is a long way of saying I spend my days making sure heavy things get to the right places without breaking, and that the people moving them don't break either. It's not glamorous work. It's good work. I go home tired in the way that lets you sleep. I have a cat named Idiot, named for reasons that are self-explanatory the moment you meet him, and a habit of reheating the same coffee 3 times before giving up on it. I wasn't looking for anything. I'd stopped looking a while back, not out of heartbreak, just out of a quiet sense that the looking for things phase of my life had probably closed without much fanfare. Her name was Mara Okafor. She ran the regional operations office 2 floors above my world, which made her, on paper, my boss's boss. She was the kind of person who answered emails at 6 in the morning and somehow also remembered that my mother had been in the hospital in March. She drank tea, never coffee, out of a dented steel travel mug that had a faded sticker of a cartoon whale on it. The kind of sticker a kid puts on something and then the adult never removes, because removing it would mean something. She was sharp the way good knives are sharp, useful, a little intimidating, and never once cruel about it. She had a way of going completely still before she said the thing she actually meant, like she was double-checking the words for sturdiness before she let them carry weight. We met because she yelled at me. Sort of. My first week, 2 years back, I'd reorganized a staging area without authorization because the old layout was a sprained ankle waiting to happen, and she came down to inform me, in front of everyone, that I didn't have the authority to do that. Then she looked at the new layout for a long second and said, "It's better. Don't do it again. Do it again on Tuesday and email me first so it's official." That was Mara. Right and a little wrong, and honest about both. The dynamic was simple and unmovable. She was my boss, and bosses and warehouse managers do not get coffee that turns into dinner that turns into anything. I told myself I noticed her so much because she was important to the job, that she stayed late because she was driven, that I carried her bags because I carry everyone's bags. I had an explanation ready for every single thing, lined up like inventory on a shelf, all of it labeled wrong. It was a Thursday in October when the status quo cracked, and it cracked over a flat tire. The garage was nearly empty by the time I came up, that gray fluorescent hum, the smell of motor oil and the rain that had been coming down all afternoon, the cold that gets into the concrete and then into you. I heard her before I saw her, not crying. Mara didn't cry in parking garages. Just a low, frustrated breath and the metallic clank of a jack handle hitting the ground. She was crouched by her back tire in a coat that cost more than my monthly truck payment, getting it filthy, fighting a lug nut that had been put on by an impact wrench in a previous geological era. "You're doing it backwards," I said. "I am not doing it backwards. You're standing on the wrench. You'll snap your knee." She looked up at me, and there was a streak of dirt across her cheekbone, and her hair had come loose from whatever architectural thing she usually did with it. And for 1 second, she wasn't anyone's boss's boss. She was just a tired woman losing a fight with a car. "Fine," she said, holding out the wrench like it had personally insulted her. "Show off." I crouched down next to her. The lug nut came loose with the kind of effort that makes your whole arm regret things. We worked in the quiet, the rain loud beyond the garage mouth, her steel mug sitting on the concrete beside her, with that little cartoon whale catching the bad light. When I got the spare on, she handed me each lug nut in order without being asked, and I realized she'd been watching closely enough to know which one came next. There was tea gone cold in the whale mug, and rain in her hair, and grease on a coat that had no business being near a tire. And she crouched there in all of it, like it was the most ordinary place in the world for the two of us to be. "You always know how to do everything," she said. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It came out almost annoyed, the way she said most warm things, wrapped in just enough sandpaper to be deniable. She looked away too quickly after she said it. Then she picked up the dirty mug and drank from it anyway, dirt and all, which for some reason is the detail I drove home with. That bothered me more than it should have. Not the mug, the looking away. You don't look away from someone over a tire. I drove home that night and didn't think about the tire. I thought about the looked away too quickly. I told myself it was nothing, that she was embarrassed about the wrench, that anyone would look away. I had a whole reasonable explanation built before I hit the highway. The trouble with reasonable explanations is that you have to keep building them. A real fact you only have to notice once. This one I had to keep re-explaining to myself every time it came back, which was roughly every 20 minutes, all the way home, and then again while I fed Idiot, who watched me lie to myself with the flat contempt only a cat can manage. Here is the thing I knew and would not look at directly. I had memorized her tea order. Earl Grey, too strong, a little honey she pretended she didn't take. I knew it the way I knew which crates were fragile. And you don't memorize a thing unless some part of you has already decided it matters. I had a tidy explanation for that too, that a good manager pays attention, that knowing people's small preferences is just leadership. It's a fine explanation, fine. It would hold up in any meeting. It would not have held up for 1 second in front of anyone who'd actually watched me make her tea the exact wrong right way without being asked. On a morning, she looked tired. And then not tell her I'd done it, because telling her would have made it a thing, and I didn't want it to be a thing. I wanted it to just quietly be true. So I started noticing on purpose, which is a dangerous thing to start doing. You can't unnotice. The shelf of wrong labels I'd built over 2 years started coming down one box at a time, and every box had the same thing inside it, and the thing was her. The first thing I noticed was the mug. The whale mug came down to my floor, more than it had any operational reason to. She'd appear at the edge of the staging area with paperwork that could have been emailed, the mug in her hand, and she'd stay a few minutes longer than the paperwork required. I'd assumed she was checking up on the floor. But the floor ran fine, and she knew it ran fine, because she was the one who'd say so. The second thing was Priya from accounting, who cornered me by the time clock and said, with the specific delight of a person handing you a grenade, "You know she reschedules her Thursday calls so she can leave when you leave, right?" And then she walked off. Because Priya is an artist and knows you never explain a grenade. I stood there holding it for a while. The Thursday calls. I'd assumed the parking garage overlap was coincidence. There is a word for 2 years of coincidence, and the word is not coincidence. The third thing happened in the break room, and I wasn't supposed to see it. Her phone was face up on the counter while she rinsed her mug, and it lit up, and I wasn't reading it. I want that on the record, but you can't unsee a name. Mine was in there. Except it wasn't Daniel Reyes or Daniel Warehouse or anything an operations director would label an employee. It was something else. Something small and private. And she turned the phone face down so fast, the clack of it was its own confession. She didn't look at me. Her voice, when she finally said something about the vendor invoices, dropped just a little. I pretended I'd seen nothing. I'd seen everything. The fourth thing was smaller and worse. We were both reaching for the same door, the heavy fire door by the east stairwell, and our hands landed on the bar at the same time, and she pulled hers back like the metal was hot, too fast. Then she laughed once, and it came out wrong, a half-second too high, the laugh of someone covering a sound they didn't mean to make. I am, for the record, a man who can identify a load-bearing wall by the way a building stands. I had been ignoring a load-bearing fact about my own life for 2 years, and the building had been swaying the whole time. My situational awareness is, apparently, available everywhere except where I actually live. The fifth thing didn't have evidence. The fifth thing was just that I'd started staying late on the nights she stayed late, and telling myself it was the inventory, and the inventory was fine, and I knew the inventory was fine, and I stayed anyway. That is not detective work. That is hiding with better branding. It came to a head on a Tuesday, which is a deeply unromantic day to have your life rearranged. The office was empty, that after-hours hush where the big building ticks and settles like it's getting comfortable. She'd asked me up to look at a vendor's pallet specs. A real reason. An actual 10-minute reason. And the 10 minutes had become 40, the way our 10 minutes had a habit of doing. The rain was back against the windows, and the whole floor smelled faintly of her tea and the cold coming off the glass. Her tea had gone cold anyway. We weren't talking about pallets anymore. We weren't talking about much. She was leaning against the edge of her desk, and I was standing maybe 3 feet away, and neither of us was moving, and the not moving had a texture to it, a weight, like the air before the storage racks groan. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Neither did she. There's a kind of silence that isn't empty. It's full, packed tight, every second of it doing work. She turned the whale mug a slow quarter turn on the desk, watching it instead of me. I watched her watch it. Outside, a car alarm went off and stopped. The radiator clicked. I could hear my own pulse, which is not a sound a man should be able to hear in his boss's office on a Tuesday. We both knew. I think we'd both known for a while. Knowing it and being in the same small room with it turned out to be 2 very different weights to carry. She set the mug down. Too hard. The little clack of it was loud in all that quiet. "You know what the worst part is?" she said, not as a question. Her voice had dropped, just a little. "It's that you'll carry the bags, you'll change the tire, you'll stay late and pretend it's the inventory." She finally looked at me and held it 1 second longer than felt safe, and you have no idea you're doing any of it for a reason. There it was, the first true thing. Indirect and disguised and barely honest enough to survive being said. The sentence had clearly been sitting behind her teeth for a long time, and it slipped out before her pride could catch it, and I watched her hear it after she'd said it. Watched something flicker across her face that was almost panic, the look of a woman who's just realized her own mouth has been declassifying documents without permission. Something in my chest shifted. Not dramatically, just enough. The body knows before the mind will admit it, and my body had gone very still, the kind of still you go when you're standing on something high and you've just looked down. "Mara," I kept my voice even, which took effort I'll never get credit for. "You don't have to say anything else. We can call this a long pallet meeting. I'll go home, you'll go home, and on Monday this never happened and nothing's weird. I mean that. Door's open. You can walk through it, and I'll hold it for you, and I won't ever ask." I meant it. That was the part that mattered. I gave her the whole exit, swept clean, no guilt on it. Because whatever this was, it could not be something I took. It had to be something she chose, out loud, with her own air, or it wasn't worth having. She didn't move toward the door. She did the opposite. She pushed off the desk, just slightly, closing maybe a foot of the 3 feet between us. And she said, "Quieter. Now, the biggest things always come out quietest. I changed your contact name in my phone 8 months ago, after you carried my mother's wheelchair up the steps at the spring thing and didn't make it a story afterward. You didn't tell anyone. You just did it." Her fingers tightened once around the edge of the desk. I told myself I'd change it back. I never did. I liked seeing it too much. That landed. That sentence did something quiet to the entire room. And here's where I'm supposed to be smooth, and I want to be honest instead, because she was being honest. So I told her the true thing, the specific one, not the cheap one. "Every person I've ever dated felt like a phase I was going through," I said. "Something I'd look back on. You never felt like that. You felt like the place the looking back happens from." I made myself say the rest. "When something goes right on the floor, you're the first person I want to tell. When something goes wrong, still you. I memorized your tea order 2 years ago, and I've spent 2 years explaining to myself why a man memorizes a tea order. I'm done explaining it. It's because it's yours." She let out a breath she'd apparently been holding since approximately the previous October. And she stepped the rest of the way in, and I caught her hand, gently. No grabbing, no surprise in it. Just a hand finding a hand the way they'd already tried to once on a fire door and weren't allowed, and for a second, the whole swaying building finally stood still. Her phone buzzed against the desk, then buzzed again. Then a third time. Insistent, she closed her eyes. "That's my sister. She texts in 3s. A pause. "She's going to ask how the pallet meeting went. What are you going to tell her?" "Nothing yet." A real smile, the smallest one, the kind I'd been collecting evidence of for weeks without admitting I was keeping a file. I want to keep this one off the record a little longer. 3 months later, we were still figuring out the grammar of it. The careful Mondays, the not telling the office, the way she'd touch the back of my hand under the table at a dinner and then pretend she hadn't, daring me to mention it. The dynamic was exactly the same as it had always been. It just had a different name now, one we mostly didn't say out loud. A year after that, I was at her place on a Sunday, and she was stealing food off my plate the way she'd apparently always intended to, and had simply been waiting 2 years for permission. And I caught myself overanalyzing a particular silence of hers before I realized it was just the silence of a person who was content. The whale mug lived on her counter now next to my reheated coffee that I'd abandoned for the 3rd time. Idiot the cat had decided her apartment was a superior jurisdiction and relocated most of his loyalties accordingly, which I took personally and she found hilarious. She still answered emails at 6 in the morning. She still went still before she said the things she meant. Nothing about us had changed. Except everything had. Years later, when people ask how we got together, she tells it her way and I tell it mine. And they don't match, which is how you know they're both true. She says she knew the day I rebuilt her staging area and emailed her on Tuesday, like she asked. I say I knew in a parking garage that smelled like rain when she told me she always waited for me to offer, and I finally understood that the offering had never been the kind thing I thought it was, that it had been a question, asked 100 times, that I'd somehow never heard until she said it plain. She still waits for me to offer. I've stopped pretending I don't know why. It wasn't new, what we found in that office on a Tuesday. It had probably always been there. It had simply, finally, stopped hiding. So, what would you have done if someone you'd quietly orbited for 2 years told you they'd been waiting all along for you to notice? And have you ever cared about someone for a long time before you let yourself admit that's what it was? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.